Daniel sat alone in his large, quiet penthouse, the sound of rain brushing softly against the tall glass windows. The city lights sparkled below like stars that had fallen to the ground, but none of it gave him comfort. People thought he had everything: a successful business, cars, a private jet, and more money than he could ever spend. But what no one saw was the silence that filled his life, when the laughter of company dinners and parties faded away. He used to believe success would fix everything. It had for a while. The first years after his company took off, he felt proud and excited. But as time went on, he noticed something that bothered him deeply. People treated him differently. Friends from his past started talking to him only when they needed help or wanted favors. Dates felt rehearsed. Women would smile and flatter him, but ask questions that always circled back to his lifestyle, his cars, his home. Daniel began to feel invisible, not as a person, but as someone behind all that wealth. Every time he tried to show his real self, people only saw his money. And then came the last relationship that broke him completely. He had met a woman through mutual friends who seemed genuine at first. She laughed easily, talked about simple things, and made him believe she was different. But months later, he overheard her on the phone bragging to a friend about how she would never have to work again once they got married. That was the day Daniel realized he had built walls around himself. Since then, he avoided dating. He focused on work, Jim, and his dog Leo. But even Leo couldn't fill the loneliness. So when one of his old college friends, Eric, called him out of the blue saying, "I've got someone you need to meet. She's not like the others," Daniel laughed it off at first. He didn't believe in blind dates anymore, but something in Eric's tone sounded sincere, so Daniel finally agreed. Still, there was one thing he couldn't shake off: the fear of being liked for his wealth again. That night he sat thinking for hours. Then an idea struck him. What if he met this woman not as Daniel the millionaire, but as an ordinary man? What if he could finally know who liked him for who he truly was? He looked at his reflection in the mirror, the sharp suit, the gold watch, the neatly styled hair. That wasn't the man he wanted her to meet. The next day, Daniel dressed in worn jeans and a simple gray shirt. He left his watch behind, drove an old car he had kept from his early years, and looked like someone who worked an average job. He told Eric to tell her his name was just Daniel, that he worked at a local repair shop. Eric hesitated but eventually agreed, though he warned him it could backfire. The blind date was set for Friday evening at a small cafe downtown. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, but a cozy place with wooden chairs, the smell of coffee beans, and soft music in the background. Daniel arrived early, heart racing in a way it hadn't in years. He took a seat by the window, nervous but oddly excited. For a few minutes he watched people pass by. Some held hands, some hurried through the rain. Others smiled while talking on the phone. It reminded him of simpler times, before all the success, before the fake smiles. He wanted to feel that again, even if just for one night. Then the door opened and a woman walked in. She looked around, a little nervous, clutching a small purse. Her hair was slightly damp from the rain, and she wore a simple blue dress. She didn't look like someone trying to impress anyone, just natural and calm. Daniel stood up and waved slightly. She smiled softly and walked toward him. "Hi, are you Daniel?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, a bit shy. "Yes, that's me," he replied with a nervous smile. They shook hands and sat down. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but both seemed unsure how to start. Then she broke it with a laugh. "I'm sorry, I'm a little bad at this. I haven't been on a blind date before." Daniel chuckled, relieved. "Same here. My friend talked me into it." They ordered coffee and started talking about small things at first: weather, favorite food, random topics. Slowly, the conversation began to flow naturally. Daniel noticed something refreshing about her. She didn't keep glancing at his clothes or ask about his job right away. She looked at him when he spoke, listened closely, and responded thoughtfully. After a while, she asked, "So what do you do?" Daniel took a small breath. "I work at a repair shop," he said, pretending to sip his coffee casually. Her eyes brightened. "Really? That sounds like hard work. My dad used to fix things around the house all the time. I always admired people who can do that." Daniel smiled faintly. Most people would have followed up with questions about how much he made or what kind of repair work it was. But she didn't. She simply nodded, genuinely interested. "What about you?" he asked. She told him she worked at a community center helping children after school. She said it didn't pay much, but she loved it because it made her feel useful. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke made Daniel forget about the act for a while. He found himself drawn in by her warmth. The evening went on and laughter filled the space between them. Daniel hadn't laughed that freely in years. There was no pretense, no show-off, just two people talking. When the rain outside stopped, they both realized hours had passed. As they walked out of the cafe, Daniel offered to walk her to her car. She smiled and said she had taken the bus. That surprised him. "You took the bus in this weather?" he asked. She shrugged lightly. "I like it sometimes. Gives me time to think." He offered to drive her home, but she politely refused. "No, it's okay. Maybe next time," she said softly before waving goodbye. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching her disappear into the crowd. Something about her stayed with him. She wasn't like the others. She didn't look at him as a project or a prize. She treated him like an ordinary man, and that's exactly what he had wanted. When he got back home, the quiet penthouse didn't feel as lonely. He poured himself a glass of water and replayed the evening in his mind. The sound of her laugh, the way she looked when she talked about helping kids, it all felt real. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to see someone again, not because he was lonely, but because he was curious to know more about her. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about whether he should tell her the truth. But then, he remembered how good it felt to just be himself without the pressure of being the rich guy. He decided he would keep the act for a little longer. Not to deceive her, but to make sure this connection was real. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself checking his phone more often, waiting for a message. Finally, she texted him, "I had a nice time. Would you like to grab dinner sometime next week?" He smiled at the screen, something inside him feeling light and excited again. He typed back, "I'd like that." The following week, they met again, this time at a small diner on the edge of town. Daniel made sure to stay consistent with his story. He dressed plainly, talked about simple things, and avoided mentioning his business or lifestyle. But what surprised him most was that she didn't care about any of that. She told him about her week, her challenges at work, and how one of the kids at the center finally learned to read. Daniel found himself smiling the entire time. She was passionate, caring, and funny in her own quiet way. When she talked, it wasn't about material things or fancy dreams. She talked about small moments, like how a child's smile made her day or how helping someone made her forget her own problems. After dinner, they took a walk along the park nearby. The night was cool. The air smelled of wet grass, and the streetlights painted long shadows on the ground. She walked beside him, sometimes quiet, sometimes laughing. At one point, she looked up and said, "You're different, Daniel." He hesitated. "Different how?" "You don't try to impress. Most guys talk about what they have, what they want. You just listen. It's nice." He looked at her for a moment, then looked away, hiding a small smile. If only she knew who he really was. But part of him feared that if she did, she'd change. The last thing he wanted was to lose this feeling of normalcy. When he dropped her off at the bus stop, she waved and said, "Same time next week?" He nodded. "Definitely." As she got on the bus, Daniel stood there watching it pull away, thinking how strange life could be. All the money in the world had never brought him this kind of peace. He got back into his old car, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: hope. That night, as he walked through the empty halls of his penthouse, the silence didn't bother him. He took off his jacket, loosened his collar, and smiled to himself. Maybe, just maybe, this time was different. But deep down, a small part of him also felt uneasy. Lies, even small ones, had a way of catching up. He knew he couldn't hide forever. Yet for now, he wanted to hold on to this moment, this fragile connection that felt more honest than anything he'd experienced in years. He poured himself a cup of tea and looked out at the city lights again. They seemed softer tonight. Maybe it wasn't the view that had changed, but him. He thought of her laugh echoing in the cafe, her eyes lighting up when she talked about the children she helped, the simple way she said goodbye. Daniel knew something was beginning, something real, and he wasn't ready to let it go. Not yet. The next few weeks became something Daniel quietly looked forward to. Every time his phone lit up with her name, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a kind of excitement that wasn't tied to business or success. They started seeing each other regularly. Sometimes they met for coffee after her work. Sometimes they took long evening walks near the park. There was never anything fancy or expensive about their meetings, yet those moments felt richer than anything money could buy. One evening, they met at a small food stall near the riverbank. The air smelled of roasted corn and grilled meat, and people laughed around them. She ordered 2 cups of hot chocolate and insisted on paying this time. Daniel tried to argue, but she pushed his hand away gently and said, "You paid last time. Let me do it today. Fair is fair," he smiled and let her. Watching her count coins from her small purse, he felt both admiration and guilt. She didn't know she was sitting beside a man who could buy the entire food stall if he wanted to. Yet here she was, treating him as an equal, with no expectations, no hidden motives. As they sat on a bench overlooking the water, she asked him about his life. He kept his answers simple, careful not to say too much. He told her he lived in a small apartment, that his work wasn't glamorous but honest, and that he liked fixing things because it gave him peace. She listened closely, nodding. "You sound content," she said softly. "Most people I meet are always chasing something bigger, but you seem happy where you are." Daniel looked at her for a moment and replied, "Maybe I used to chase things too, but I realized peace matters more than success." She smiled, her eyes warm. "I think that's true. My mother used to say that happiness isn't about what you have. It's about who you share it with." Those words stayed with him long after the night ended. When he got home, he sat in silence, thinking about how strange it was that someone with so little could speak such wisdom. While people in his world, people with millions, were still unhappy. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between them grew stronger. She was always kind, always patient, and never tried to rush anything. She didn't care about fancy gifts or expensive places. Sometimes they just sat in his car with takeout food, talking for hours. One Saturday afternoon, she invited him to help out at the community center where she worked. Daniel hesitated. He had never been around that kind of environment before. Children running around, laughter echoing through the halls, walls decorated with crayon drawings. But when he saw her kneel down to tie a kid's shoelace, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world, his heart softened. He spent the afternoon helping her hand out snacks, fix broken chairs, and even play a few games with the kids. Watching her work made him see how much love she carried inside her. She wasn't doing this for attention or money. She did it because it was who she was. Later, when they sat on the steps outside the center, she looked at him and said, "You were really good with them today." "I didn't know you liked kids," Daniel smiled. "I didn't know either. But I think you make everything easier." She laughed quietly. "That's a nice thing to say." There was a moment of silence after that. One of those moments when the air feels different, when something unspoken lingers between two people. Daniel wanted to tell her the truth right then, but the words got stuck. He was afraid that revealing who he really was might destroy what they had. As their bond grew, so did Daniel's conflict inside. Every time she talked about her dreams of one day owning a small cafe or helping more children, he wanted to tell her he could make it happen in a heartbeat. But he stopped himself. He didn't want to be her savior. He wanted to be her equal. One night after dropping her home, Daniel sat in his car for a long time. Her building was old, the paint peeling, the lights dim. He noticed how carefully she locked the door behind her, how she smiled at the elderly woman next door before going inside. There was something so real about her life, humble but full of meaning. He thought about his own world of marble floors, private chefs, and endless luxury, and for the first time, it all felt heavy, empty. The next morning, while having coffee in his penthouse, his friend Eric stopped by. Eric looked around and said, "Man, you've been disappearing lately. Everything okay?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just been spending time with someone." Eric raised an eyebrow. "The girl from the blind date?" Daniel nodded again. "So when are you going to tell her who you really are?" Eric asked. Daniel sighed. "I don't know, not yet. She thinks I work at a repair shop." Eric nearly choked on his drink. "You told her that, you? A CEO pretending to fix engines?" Daniel looked out the window, ignoring his friend's laughter. "I just needed to know she wasn't like the others. I needed to see if she'd still care about me without the money." Eric shook his head. "You're playing with fire. When she finds out, she might not forgive you." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "But if she's the one, I'll take that risk." That night, Daniel met her again. They went to a small outdoor concert in the park. People danced, children ran around, and the music filled the cool night air. She leaned against his shoulder, laughing at something he said. In that moment, everything felt simple and perfect. But perfection has a way of making people nervous. Daniel could feel the weight of his secret growing heavier. He kept asking himself when would be the right time to tell her, but no moment ever seemed right. Every time he saw her smiling, he didn't want to ruin it. After the concert, they sat near a fountain, the moonlight reflecting off the water. She looked up at him and said, "You know, you're one of the most genuine people I've met. I've had people walk out on me because I don't have much. But you're different." Her words hit him like a knife. He wanted to say, "I'm not who you think I am," but instead, he forced a smile and said softly, "Maybe I've just learned to appreciate what really matters." When he got home that night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing her voice, those words. It was getting harder to keep pretending. A few days later, he decided to surprise her at the community center. He brought food for the kids and helped set up tables. When she saw him, her face lit up with joy. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said. "Of course," Daniel smiled. "You said you needed help." They spent the whole afternoon together again. Daniel helped fix a broken shelf while she told the kids stories. Every now and then he caught her looking at him with this quiet admiration, and it made him feel warm inside. After everyone left, they sat together, tired but happy. She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I'm really glad I met you, Daniel." He looked down at her, his chest tight. "Me too," he said quietly. She laughed softly. "You know, I used to think good people were rare. But then you showed up." Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't, his throat felt tight. She had no idea that the man sitting beside her had lied from the very beginning. That evening, while driving home, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't hide forever. She deserved the truth. Maybe she would walk away. Maybe she wouldn't. But at least she'd know who he really was. But fate, as always, had other plans. Before he could find the right moment, something unexpected happened. One night, while they were having dinner at a small diner, she looked distracted. Her eyes were distant and she kept fidgeting with her spoon. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked gently. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, just a rough week. My sister hasn't been feeling well and I've been worried." Daniel frowned. "You never told me you had a sister." She smiled faintly. "She's younger. I've been taking care of her since our parents passed away. She's the reason I work so hard." Hearing that made Daniel's heart ache. She wasn't just kind. She was selfless. While he was pretending to live a simpler life, she was actually living one, carrying real burdens without complaint. He wanted to offer help so badly, but he couldn't without revealing the truth. Instead, he said, "If you ever need anything, I'm here." She nodded, smiling softly. "Thank you. That means a lot." That night, after dropping her home, Daniel sat in his car again, staring at the small apartment window that glowed faintly from her light inside. He imagined her making tea for her sister, maybe sitting together and laughing through their worries. He felt both admiration and shame. He drove home slowly, his mind heavy. He had everything: wealth, comfort, security. Yet she carried so much responsibility with almost nothing and still managed to smile. It made him realize how much he'd taken for granted. Later that week, he bought groceries and quietly left them near her apartment door. He didn't write a note or say a word about it. When she mentioned later that someone had left food outside, Daniel pretended to be surprised and said maybe it was one of her neighbors. He just couldn't bring himself to take credit. Days went by and their bond deepened. But the guilt grew too. Every moment they spent together, every smile, every laugh, it all reminded him that it was built on a lie. One evening she told him she wanted him to meet her sister. "She keeps asking about you," she said shyly. "I told her you're the kindest person I've met." Daniel's heart raced. He wasn't ready, but he couldn't refuse. He agreed. That night, lying awake, he thought about everything. He knew that once he met her family, things would get more serious. And if he still hadn't told her by then, it would be too late. He promised himself that after meeting her sister, he would tell her everything, the truth about who he was, what he owned, and why he had lied. He didn't know what her reaction would be. He didn't know if she would forgive him. But he was sure of one thing. He couldn't keep pretending anymore. He cared about her too much to keep living a lie. As he stared out at the city lights from his balcony, the same view that once gave him pride now made him feel small. Somewhere out there, a woman who had almost nothing had taught him what it really meant to live, to care, to love without conditions, and he knew, deep down, that no matter what happened next, his life would never be the same again. Daniel could barely focus at work the entire week after she invited him to meet her sister. His company's office building was filled with people rushing around, talking numbers and deals, but his mind wasn't on any of it. Every time he tried to go over documents or emails, he found himself drifting away, thinking about her smile, her laughter, and how pure her intentions always seemed. He hadn't felt this nervous in years, not even when he was pitching his first big investment or signing a multi-million-dollar contract. This was different. This wasn't about business. This was about something that felt real and unpredictable. On Saturday afternoon, he drove his old car to her neighborhood. It was an older part of town, but full of life. Children played in the narrow streets. Vendors sold fruits and neighbors talked over fences. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery mixed with the sound of laughter echoing down the block. She came out of the small apartment building to greet him, waving with a smile that made his heart skip. "You made it," she said, holding the door open for him. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, following her inside. The apartment was small but warm. The walls were painted light yellow and the furniture looked old but well cared for. On one wall hung pictures of her and her sister, both smiling in different stages of their lives. There was a coziness to the place that money couldn't buy. Her younger sister, who looked about 16, peeked from behind the kitchen door with curious eyes. She had the same kind of gentle smile. "This is my sister Mia," she said, motioning for her to come forward. "Hi, Daniel," Mia said softly. "She's told me a lot about you." Daniel smiled, feeling slightly awkward. "All good things, I hope?" Mia giggled. "Mostly." The three of them sat together, sharing stories while the smell of food filled the small kitchen. She had cooked a simple meal, pasta, salad, and warm bread. But to Daniel, it felt like the best dinner he'd had in years. He watched her move around the kitchen, laughing with her sister, and something inside him stirred. She wasn't pretending to be kind or humble. She simply was. Everything about her felt genuine. When they sat down to eat, the conversation turned light and playful. Mia teased her sister, saying how she wouldn't stop talking about him lately. Daniel laughed, a little embarrassed but also touched. After dinner, Mia showed Daniel her drawings, sketches of buildings and city streets. She said she wanted to be an architect one day, but wasn't sure if they could afford the tuition. Daniel looked through her drawings and said, "You have real talent. Don't give up on that dream." Her eyes lit up. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said with sincerity. When he was about to leave later that evening, her sister whispered to him near the door, "Thank you for making her smile again. She hasn't been this happy in a long time." Those words stayed with him as he drove away. The night air felt different, fresh but heavy with emotion. The next day, he couldn't stop thinking about her and her sister. He admired how much she gave to others while asking for nothing. He had met countless people in his life who had everything and still wanted more, but she was the opposite. She had little and still found reasons to be thankful. That following week, they spent more time together. They went for evening walks, sat by the river, and shared stories from their pasts. She told him how her parents passed away when she was in college, and how she had to give up her studies to raise her sister. There were moments when her eyes would fill with quiet sadness, but she never complained. Daniel listened closely, his heart aching for her. He wanted to reach out and tell her he could change her life overnight, that she would never have to worry about rent or money again, but he stayed quiet. He wasn't ready to break the illusion yet, not until he was sure she cared for him, not what he could give her. One evening, while they were having dinner at a small cafe, she said something that caught him off guard. "You know, Daniel," she said, stirring her tea, "you're not like anyone I've met before. You don't talk about big plans or show off. You just make me feel calm." He smiled softly. "Maybe I've learned to value quiet things." She nodded. "That's rare these days. Everyone I meet seems to be chasing something they can't even define." He wanted to tell her the irony of her words, that he had been one of those people once, chasing money and status until he forgot what peace felt like. After dinner, as he walked her home, the wind was cold and the streets were quiet. Before she went inside, she looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Of course. If you ever had more, like if your life suddenly changed, do you think you'd still be the same person?" The question hit him deeply. He hesitated before answering. "I'd like to think so. I guess it depends on what you let change you." She smiled softly. "I think you'd stay the same. You seem like someone who doesn't care about money much." Daniel forced a smile, but inside guilt burned. He was everything she thought he wasn't. That night, back in his penthouse, he couldn't sleep. He walked through the rooms, each one large and perfect, yet empty. He stopped in front of a framed photo of himself from years ago, taken at a business award ceremony. He looked proud in the picture, surrounded by people clapping. But the man in that photo looked like a stranger now. He whispered to himself, "Would she still care for me if she knew?" Over the next few days, his routine felt strange. He went to work in suits during the day, making big decisions, signing contracts, shaking hands with people who called him sir. But in the evenings, he'd change into plain clothes, drive his old car, and live a completely different life. It felt like he was two people, one living in luxury, the other searching for something money could never buy. As weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. She began to open up more, talking about her dreams. She wanted to open a small cafe one day. Not for profit, but to create a place where people felt welcome. Daniel listened, silently picturing it. He imagined himself helping her build it one day, maybe even secretly funding it without her knowing. But the more he thought about helping her, the more he realized it would mean nothing if it came from a lie. One Friday evening, while they were sitting at the park watching the sunset, she said, "You know, my friends keep asking me why I'm dating someone who doesn't have much. They think I should be with someone who can give me a better life. But I told them happiness isn't about money. It's about peace." Daniel looked at her quietly, his heart tightening. She smiled at him, unaware of how her words pierced him. "I just want to be with someone who makes me feel safe," she said. He nodded, though his throat felt dry. That's what everyone deserves. As he dropped her home that night, he knew it was time. The lie had gone on too long. He decided that the next time they met, he would tell her everything, who he really was, what he owned, and why he had hidden it. He was terrified, but he couldn't carry the guilt anymore. The following week, he planned everything. He wanted to tell her in person, somewhere calm and private. He even arranged to pick her up on Saturday morning. But just as he was about to leave his house, he received a message from her. "Hey, can we change plans? My sister isn't feeling well again, and I need to stay with her." He replied, "Of course. Let me bring something for you both." She refused politely. "You don't need to. I'll be fine. I'll call you later." But Daniel couldn't just sit back. He drove to her neighborhood anyway, stopping by a pharmacy to pick up medicine and some groceries. When he reached her building, he quietly left the bags outside her door and walked back to his car before she could notice. From his car, he saw her open the door a few minutes later. She looked surprised, then smiled softly as she read the note he had scribbled. "Take care of her. Get some rest." That night she called him, her voice soft. "You didn't have to do that, but thank you. You're always so thoughtful." Daniel smiled, sitting on his couch. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than that," she said. "I don't think you realize how much you mean to me." Her words hit him with warmth and fear all at once. He wanted to say it back, but the truth still hung between them like a shadow. After they hung up, Daniel stared at his phone for a long time. He knew she truly cared for him. Not for his wealth, but for his kindness. That should have made him happy, but instead it made the guilt even heavier. The next morning, he stood in front of his mirror, dressed in his expensive suit, looking at himself like he was staring at a stranger. He whispered, "It's time." He planned to take her out that evening and finally tell her everything. No more pretending, no more lies. When he picked her up, she noticed something was different. He was quiet, thoughtful, and his eyes seemed heavier. She asked, "Are you okay?" He nodded slightly. "There's something I need to tell you tonight." She looked worried but didn't push. They went for a drive, ending up near the same cafe where they first met. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The same smell of coffee beans filled the air. She smiled faintly. "Feels like yesterday we were both nervous here." Daniel smiled back, though his chest felt tight. "Yeah, I still remember it." He looked at her, the words forming in his throat, but before he could speak, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Whatever it is, she said softly. You can tell me. I trust you. Her words froze him. How could he tell her now, knowing that trust was about to break? He took a deep breath, ready to speak, but the waiter arrived with their drinks, interrupting the moment. She laughed, thanking the waiter, and the tension eased slightly. Daniel hesitated again. Maybe it wasn't the right time. Maybe after dinner. But as the night went on, every smile she gave him made it harder to say. He realized that telling her the truth might mean losing her forever. When he finally dropped her home, she leaned into the car window and said, "Thank you for being in my life. I feel lucky." He watched her walk away and his heart sank. He couldn't do it. Not tonight. Driving back, he whispered to himself, "Soon. I'll tell her soon." But deep down, he knew the longer he waited, the more it would hurt when the truth finally came out. As he parked his car, his phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "Good night, Daniel. I hope you never change." He stared at the screen for a long time, unable to type anything back, because he knew that once she found out who he really was, everything would change. The next few days felt heavy for Daniel. Every time he looked at her, he was reminded of how much she trusted him. That trust had become a burden he carried quietly. He wanted to tell her everything, but each time he tried to find the right moment, something stopped him. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the thought that once the truth came out, she'd never look at him the same way again. They met again the following weekend. She had planned a small picnic at a nearby park. She made sandwiches, fruit salad, and fresh lemonade. Nothing fancy, but it felt like something special. As they sat on a blanket under a tree watching kids play nearby, she said, "I was thinking of taking an extra shift at work next month. My sister's school trip is coming up and she really wants to go. I don't want her to miss out." Daniel looked at her, his chest tightening. "She always put everyone else first," he said quietly. "You work too hard. You should rest sometimes," she smiled faintly. "Rest doesn't pay bills." He wanted to tell her she wouldn't have to worry about money ever again, but instead he said, "You're strong. I admire that." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "I don't feel strong most days, but I guess we do what we have to." Daniel nodded. "You do more than that. You give even when you barely have anything left." She laughed a little. "That's life, isn't it? You can't wait to have everything before you start giving. You just do what you can." Those words stayed in his head. He'd met people who gave speeches about kindness and generosity but never practiced them. Yet here she was, living it every single day without expecting applause. After they ate, she pulled out an old camera from her bag. "This was my mom's," she said. "She used to take pictures of everything. I'm not as good as she was, but I try." She took a picture of Daniel while he wasn't ready. He laughed. "You could have warned me," she smiled. "Sometimes the best pictures happen when you don't pose." He watched her carefully frame the next shot, her hair moving in the wind, her eyes full of light. Something inside him told him he couldn't keep lying much longer. She deserved the truth. Later, as they packed up, he said quietly, "Can we talk about something serious?" She looked curious. "Sure." He hesitated, but then her phone rang. She answered quickly. It was her sister, who sounded upset. Something about the landlord asking for the rent earlier than expected. She frowned and apologized to Daniel. "I'm so sorry. I have to go home and figure this out." He nodded. "I'll drive you." On the way, she explained that their landlord had been threatening to raise the rent or find new tenants. She tried to sound calm, but Daniel could see the worry in her eyes. When they reached her building, she rushed upstairs to talk to the landlord while Daniel waited in his car. Through the window, he could see her trying to reason with him, hands clasped nervously. The landlord shook his head and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. She came back out a few minutes later, trying to hold back tears. Daniel stepped out of the car. "What happened?" "He wants the full payment by next week," she said softly. "If we can't manage it, he'll give the place to someone else." Daniel felt a wave of anger rise in him, not at her, but at the situation. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and life still found ways to test her. Without thinking much, he said, "Let me help." She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't let you do that. You've already done enough." "This isn't charity," he said gently. "It's just me caring." She gave a small smile. "I know you care, but I don't want to depend on anyone. I've done that before, and it never ends well." Daniel didn't push. He respected her pride. But later that night, he sat in his car for a long time before driving home. He couldn't sleep knowing she was struggling. He made a quiet decision. The next morning, he called his assistant and arranged for an anonymous payment to cover her rent for 6 months. He didn't want her to know it was from him, not yet. He just wanted her to have peace. That evening, she called him, sounding overjoyed. "You won't believe this, Daniel. The landlord said someone paid our rent in advance. He doesn't even know who it was. Can you imagine?" Daniel smiled softly, pretending to sound surprised. "Really? That's incredible. I don't know who did it, but I feel so grateful. Maybe it's just luck for once, maybe," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe you deserve it," she laughed. "I don't know about that, but it feels good to breathe again." Her happiness made him feel both proud and guilty. He had done the right thing, but part of him hated that he had to lie about it. Over the next few weeks, things seemed lighter between them. They laughed more, shared more meals, took walks late into the night. She began to trust him with her deeper thoughts, the kind she had never shared with anyone. One night, as they sat by the river watching the city lights reflect on the water, she said, "I used to think love was about finding someone perfect, but now I think it's about finding someone who stays." Daniel turned to her slowly. "Someone who stays?" She nodded. "Yeah, life gets messy. People change. But if someone still chooses you every day, even when things aren't easy, that's love." Her words struck him hard. He had spent so long building a world of wealth and comfort, but none of it ever made him feel this kind of peace. Sitting there with her under the quiet night sky, he realized he didn't want to lose her. But the secret he was holding could destroy everything. That night, when he got home, he looked around his large, empty penthouse again. He walked to the window and looked down at the glowing city. Everything he owned suddenly felt meaningless. He made up his mind he would tell her the truth. No matter how it ended, she deserved honesty. The next day, he arranged to meet her at the cafe where they first met. He wore his usual simple clothes, but this time, he carried a small envelope in his pocket. Inside it were 2 photos, one of him at a business event and another of his company's building with his name on the sign. He planned to use them to explain everything. When she arrived, she looked as cheerful as ever. She was carrying a small gift for him, a hand-knitted scarf she'd made herself. "I thought you might need this," she said with a shy smile. "It's getting colder." Daniel took it, his throat tight. "Thank you. It's perfect." They talked for a while, laughing like always, but his heart wasn't in it. Finally, when there was a pause, he said quietly, "There's something important I need to tell you." She looked at him with concern. "You're scaring me a little." "What's wrong?" He reached into his pocket, hands trembling slightly. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Her smile faded. "What do you mean?" "I'm not who you think I am," he said softly. "I don't work at a small repair shop. That was just something I said when we met. I own a company. I'm wealthy. I didn't tell you because I wanted to know if you'd care for me without any of that." She stared at him silently. For a long moment, she didn't say a word. Then she looked down, her fingers tightening around her cup. "So all this time you've been pretending?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Not about my feelings. Those are real. I just wanted to be sure you weren't with me for money." She nodded slowly, still not looking at him. "I don't even know what to say." "You lied to me, Daniel." "I know," he said softly. "And I hate that I did. But everything I felt, everything we shared was real." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "You think that makes it okay? You looked me in the eye so many times and let me believe something that wasn't true. I didn't mean to hurt you. You just didn't trust me," she interrupted quietly. He had no defense for that. She was right. She stood up slowly, wrapping her scarf around her neck. "I need time to think." Daniel stood too. "Please don't walk away like this." "Let me explain." She shook her head. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Then she walked out, leaving him standing there, surrounded by the quiet buzz of the cafe. Daniel sat back down, staring at the empty chair across from him. For the first time in years, he felt completely helpless. Days passed, and she didn't answer his calls or messages. He drove past her building a few times, but he couldn't bring himself to go in. He didn't want to make things worse. He tried to focus on work, but even his board meetings felt hollow. His employees noticed he wasn't himself. The usual confident energy he carried was gone. A week later, he received a text from her. It was short. We need to talk." His heart raced as he drove to meet her at a small park near her home. When he arrived, she was sitting on a bench looking out at the trees. He approached slowly. "Thank you for meeting me." She nodded, her voice calm but distant. "I've been thinking a lot." "I'll answer anything," he said quietly. "I just needed to understand why you couldn't be honest from the start," she said. "Was I really that hard to trust?" "It wasn't about you," he said softly. "It was about me. I've met so many people who only cared about my money. I didn't want that again. But I see now I went about it the wrong way," she sighed. "You know what hurts the most? It's not that you're rich. It's that you didn't think I'd accept you for who you are." He looked at her, guilt filling his chest. "I was scared. You're the only person who ever made me feel normal again." She stayed silent for a moment, then said, "I just need to know. Was anything we shared real?" "Every moment," he said quickly. "Every word, every smile, every feeling. That's the only real thing I've ever had." Tears filled her eyes. She looked away. "I want to believe you. I really do." Daniel reached out, gently touching her hand. "I'll do anything to prove it. You don't have to forgive me now. Just give me a chance to make it right." She took a deep breath and looked at him. "I don't know what's next, Daniel, but I need time. I care about you, but it's a lot," he nodded slowly. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait." They sat in silence for a while, the wind rustling through the trees. Then she stood up and walked away, leaving him sitting there again, alone but hopeful that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. That night, he sat by his window, staring out at the city lights. He didn't know if she'd ever forgive him, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up, not on her, not on them. Weeks passed, and Daniel still hadn't heard from her. Each day felt longer than the one before. He tried to bury himself in work, hoping the noise of meetings, phone calls, and decisions would drown out the ache inside him. But every time he walked into his office, every time he looked at the city skyline from his window, he thought of her. He missed her voice, her laughter, the way she looked at him without expecting anything. He missed the calm she brought into his life. But he knew he had no right to rush her. She needed space, and for once Daniel had to learn to wait for something that money couldn't buy. One evening, after another long day, he went back to the cafe where they'd first met. It was quiet, just like that night, with soft music playing in the background. He sat at the same table, staring at the seat across from him, remembering her smile. The waitress recognized him and said kindly, "You look like you're waiting for someone." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." When he left, the rain had started to fall, just like the first night they met. He walked slowly through the streets, not caring that he was getting soaked. For once, he wasn't thinking about business or image. He was just a man who had made a mistake and didn't know how to fix it. Back at his penthouse, he found himself staring at the scarf she had knitted for him. It was soft, simple, and real, just like her. He decided then that he couldn't just sit and wait forever. He needed to show her that what he felt wasn't built on lies anymore. The next morning, he called her workplace. The woman who answered said she had taken a few days off. He hesitated, wondering if he should go see her or leave her alone. But something in him said this was his last chance to make things right. He drove to the community center anyway, where the children she helped often gathered after school. When he arrived, he saw her outside talking to one of the kids. The boy was crying because his drawing had been ruined by the rain. She bent down, gently comforting him, helping him start over on a new page. Daniel stood there for a moment, just watching her. That small, simple kindness reminded him of everything he loved about her. She noticed him finally, surprise flashing across her face. "Daniel," she said quietly when she walked over. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said softly. "I just needed to see you." She looked unsure for a moment, glancing at the children playing nearby. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to tell you something. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day." She folded her arms slightly, still guarded. "And what did you realize?" "That I was wrong," he said honestly. "I thought pretending to be someone else would protect me, but all it did was hurt the one person who never asked for anything from me. I was afraid you'd only see the money, not me. But now I see I was the one who didn't see you clearly. You've always been real with me, and I didn't give you the same honesty in return." Her expression softened, but her eyes stayed serious. "You can't build something real on lies, Daniel." no matter how good your reasons were. I know, he said, but I want to build it again, this time with truth. I don't expect forgiveness today, but I'll wait as long as it takes. She was quiet for a long time. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, mixed with the rustle of leaves. Finally, she sighed. You really don't give up easily, do you? He smiled slightly. Not when something matters this much. She looked at him, and for a moment her eyes softened completely. I don't know if I can just forget what happened, but I believe you mean what you say. That's a start. Daniel nodded, his heart lifting a little. That's all I need for now, a start. From that day, he didn't rush her. He showed up at the community center sometimes to help, quietly keeping his distance when she needed space. He brought supplies, helped the kids with small projects, and never mentioned money again. Slowly, she began to see that he wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to earn back her trust. One afternoon, a few weeks later, one of the kids fell and scraped his knee. Daniel rushed to help, and as he gently cleaned the wound, the boy looked up and said, You're not like the other grown-ups. You don't act all serious. Daniel laughed softly, maybe because I'm still a kid inside. She watched from a distance, her heart melting a little. The man she saw that day wasn't a millionaire or a businessman. He was just someone kind and patient, someone who cared. That evening, as the sun began to set, she walked over to him. You've been helping out a lot lately, she said. He smiled. I like it here. It feels good to do something that actually matters. She nodded slowly. You're different now. Maybe I finally figured out what's important, he said quietly. They walked together in silence for a while, the air filled with the soft sound of kids playing in the distance. Then she turned to him and said, If I decide to give this another chance, you have to promise me something. Anything, he said. No more pretending, she said. No more tests, no more hiding. Just honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. He nodded. I promise. I've had enough of masks. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Then maybe we can try again. That night they went for dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at the same small cafe where it all began. The owner recognized them and smiled warmly, saying, It's nice to see familiar faces again. They sat by the window, and for the first time, Daniel didn't feel like he had to hide anything. He told her about his life, his business, his fears, and the loneliness that came with success. She listened quietly, not judging, just understanding. You know, she said after a while, you could have told me all this from the beginning. I would have still liked you. He smiled softly. Now I know that. But I guess I had to lose your trust to understand how much it meant. She reached across the table and touched his hand gently. You didn't lose it completely. You just have to earn it back. He squeezed her hand lightly. Then that's what I'll do every day. As weeks turned into months, their bond slowly grew stronger again. This time, everything between them was open and honest. She saw his world, the business meetings, the travel, the people who treated him differently because of his money. And he saw hers, the long hours, the effort, the genuine joy she found in helping others. They balanced each other. Where he had excess, she had simplicity. Where he had walls, she had warmth. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to his company's charity event. At first, she hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? Those kinds of people might not like me. He smiled. You'll fit in better than you think. You're the reason I even started this new charity fund. She looked surprised. You did, he nodded. For underfunded community centers like yours. It's time I used my money for something that really matters.